Middle years ago, a middle-aged couple living quietly in the small town of Gonzales, Louisiana, vanished from their home on a summer night. No trace, no note, leaving behind a house locked tight and their car still sitting in the garage. Authorities at the time suspected foul play, but with no bodies, no evidence of a crime, and the investigation quickly hitting a dead end, the case was filed away as an unresolved missing persons matter. Yet for decades afterward, local folks never stopped talking about that house, where many believed the truth had never been fully buried. Then one day, nearly 60 years later, when a cold case unit investigator was reviewing the old files, she spotted a tiny detail in the crime scene photos that everyone before her had overlooked. A detail that could upend the entire case and reveal a truth no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you love cases dug up after decades in the dust, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next video. July 1947. The town of Gonzales, Louisiana, lay quiet among sugarcane fields and flooded swampland, the air thick with heat and the smell of wet earth. The main road cut through town and out to a sparsely settled neighborhood where the Barton Hamilton family lived in a two-story white-painted wooden house with a faded gray tin roof. Barton, 41, worked as an accountant at a small lumber mill near the river. His wife Christine, 38, took in sewing for the shop at St. Teresa's Catholic Church, and their 22-year-old son Charles, considered the best educated kid in the area, was studying engineering in Baton Rouge. The Hamiltons kept to themselves, but were seen as a model family. Everyone off to their own business in the morning, gathering in the little kitchen at night to listen to the radio and talk about crops, lumber prices, or Charles's classes. They rarely went out, yet were always polite and often helped by neighbors when needed. In early July, the town was gearing up for the 4th. Flags hung along the streets. The church got a fresh coat of paint on its fence, and the Hamiltons had even tied a few red, white, and blue ribbons across their front porch. That night, the air was stifling, heat rising off the ground and mixing with kitchen smoke. Neighbors noticed the Hamiltons' lights stayed on later than usual. Some later recalled hearing a door open and slam shut, something heavy drop onto the floor, then nothing but silence. A light rain started, enough to drown out any other sound. When dawn came, the street was still quiet. No sign of life from the White House. Curtains were drawn tight, no smoke rose from the chimney, and Barton's black Ford sat untouched in the garage. The milkman passed by and thought it odd that yesterday's bottles were still on the step. By mid-morning, one of Christine's friends stopped by to return some fabric, knocked repeatedly, got no answer, walked around. Back. Kitchen door locked too. Unna spread fast in a small town. A whole couple missing from first light was almost unheard of. Neighbors checked for Charles. No sign of him in the yard either. People started asking if anyone had seen the Hamiltons leave or heard them mention going anywhere. Everyone shook their heads. By noon, under a brutal sun, a few relatives showed up, tried the front door, the back door, everything locked from the inside. They shouted, "No reply." Whispers raced down the little street, mixing with the drone of cicadas and the smell of wet earth from the night rain. Finally, when every attempt to reach them failed, a neighbor walked straight to the police station downtown to report that Barton and Christine Hamilton, and apparently their son, had vanished. No one knew where, and their house had gone eerily silent. The report was logged and Sheriff Walter Duville took the case. That afternoon, he left headquarters with a deputy in the old Plymouth and drove the dirt road south to the Hamilton place. On the way, he remarked how the air still hung heavy after last night's rain, gray clouds covering the sky. When the car stopped in front of the White House, several neighbors were already waiting at the gate, faces tight with worry, eyes tracking every move the lawman made. Duville walked through the gate and scanned the yard. Grass still wet. A few shallow shoe prints in the soft dirt. Yesterday's milk bottles on the step. Front door shut, curtains closed. No sound from inside. He knocked 3 times. Nothing. The deputy circled to the back. Kitchen door locked from the inside. No pre-marks. Duville crouched by the front lock undisturbed. Paint around the edges unscratched. In the garage, Barton's black Ford sat exactly where it belonged. A thin layer of dust on the hood, tires settled in the same tracks. No sign any other vehicle had been there.
Duville jotted preliminary notes, called out one more time. Only hollow echoes answered. As he turned away, the front door suddenly cracked open and Charles Hamilton stepped out. Shirt wrinkled, hair messy, looking exhausted. He said he'd been home all morning and assumed his parents had left early the previous day for a cabin on Lake Mauropas with 2 friends. Duville asked for the friends' names. Charles was vague, said they were work contacts of his father's, couldn't recall addresses. Duville wrote it down, then asked to step inside. Charles reluctantly agreed and moved aside. Living room tidy, 2 cold coffee cups on the dining table, newspaper open, tablecloth undisturbed. Duville walked the hallway, checked every room, windows locked from inside, beds made flat, no signs of struggle or anything moved. In the master bedroom, closet closed, no missing suitcases, Christine's jewelry box untouched. He had the deputy photograph everything and mark object positions. The place was too neat. It unsettled him. Back in the living room, he pressed Charles for more details about the trip, departure time,
Transportation. Who picked them up? Charles answered slowly, voice, even no visible emotion or panic. Duville watched him closely, then closed his notebook. He found no evidence of crime, yet he couldn't shake the wrongness of the house, frozen in a half-finished moment. No trace of people about to leave town. On the porch, he checked the locks again, scanned the yard and fence. Nothing but heavy silence and late afternoon light on the wet steps. He had neighbors witness and sign the report, confirming doors locked from inside. House orderly, no forced entry, vehicle in place. The first report was finished on the spot with the temporary conclusion, missing cause unknown. As he packed up, Duville looked back at the house one last time. No sound except wind in the trees and the faint creak of the metal gate, as if the place itself was hiding something he couldn't yet name. Back at headquarters, Sheriff Walter Duvall spent the afternoon verifying everything Charles had said. According to the Sun, Barton and Christine left early to spend a few days at a cabin on Lake Mauropas, picked up by friends in their own car. Duvall pulled records of rentals around the lake. Nothing under Hamilton or anything matching the description. Cabins back then were watched by locals. No one remembered seeing a couple that fit. He phoned the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office. No traffic incidents involving Barton's car or anyone matching their description. No recent accidents on the roads either. He checked with Barton's lumber mill. Barton hadn't shown up since yesterday morning and never missed work without calling out of character. The foreman said no one at the mill knew any friends by the names Charles had vaguely mentioned. Duvall noted, companions unverified, no planned or confirmed trip. He called the church sewing shop where Christine worked part-time. She had orders due by the weekend and had never mentioned leaving town. A co-worker said Christine was supposed to drop off finished pieces the previous morning to get paid. No sign she was packing or going anywhere. Duvall sent men door to door again. Neighbors confirmed the Hamiltons' lights were on late, but no one actually saw them leave. One man, 3 houses down, thought he heard a car pass around midnight, but wasn't sure whose. Back at his desk, Duvall compared everything to the scene report. Nothing supported the idea. Barton and Christine had left Gonzales. The Ford's tires showed no fresh tracks, engine stone cold, hadn't moved in at least 24 hours. Barton's personal journal recovered from the house, last entry 2 days earlier, call accounting office. No mention of any trip. Post office confirmed, no unusual mail in or out. Piece by piece, the picture contradicted the Sun's story. Charles insisted his parents left willingly. No one else could confirm it. Duvall stared out the window at the darkening sky and rewrote the initial report, crossing out missing cause unknown and adding preliminary verification complete. No. Evidence subjects left locality. Recommend expanded search phase. He closed the file, told the deputy to ready a search team, and sent formal notice up to the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Office, missing persons case. Gonzales, Louisiana search to commence. The next morning, after clearance from the parish, Sheriff Walter Duvall launched a full-scale search around Lake Mauropas, the supposed final destination. Notices went to every local department, calling in auxiliary police, water rescue teams, and civilian volunteers. Local hunters showed up with flat-bottom boats, spotlights, and tracking dogs. A quick briefing was held in the station yard. Duvall laid a big map across a patrol car hood and divided the lake into sectors with red pencil. West Side Sheriff's deputies, south, and northeast hunters and volunteers, open water, 2 rescue boats. Objective: any sign of a cabin, vehicle, or belongings tied to the Hamiltons. At sunrise, the teams moved out. The road to Lake Marapus twisted through swamp, thick trees on both sides, insects buzzing, air heavy with mud. Duvall rode in the lead boat, a small wooden skiff with an outboard, along with 2 deputies and a local hunter. The water was dark, the surface mirror flat under a gray sky, tall reeds blocking the view. The hunter occasionally pointed west to old logging trails now overgrown, wide enough years ago for a car, but swallowed by grass. On shore, dog teams worked the few dry ridges, but most of the area was flooded and treacherous. By noon, the north and west sectors were cleared. Nothing. Duvall called a break and set up a checkpoint at the Treine to collect reports. Road patrols checked highways for any strange vehicles from the night in question. Also nothing. Rescue boats kept probing the water with poles and dragnets. Duvall noted terrain conditions: deep mud bottom, sudden drop-offs, dark pockets deeper than 10 feet, slow current but dangerous undertows, he wrote. Dense swamp, limited access, need more small boats and local guides. By afternoon, the southern team returned with a few random finds: white-painted scrap wood, a rusted tin can, old rope. None relevant. No cabins existed in the area, no tire tracks, no roads to the shore. Hunters confirmed the place had been empty of structures for years. As the sun dropped behind distant trees, Duvall called it for the day. Head teams marked searched areas with bamboo stakes and red cloth, then stood alone on the bank, staring across the flat water, turning copper in the sunset. No cabin, no vehicle signs, no witnesses. Every lid deadened it exactly where he'd hoped for answers. In his daily log, he wrote, "No secondary scene located. Area vast. Swamp, deep. Visibility poor. Recommend expanding search radius 10 miles around lake." As the teams pulled out, outboard motors and barking dogs faded into the dusk, leaving only wind and dark water reflecting a thin moon. Like the lake itself was refusing to answer the question. The whole town still couldn't. The next morning, the search resumed with an expanded scope toward the southwest of Lake Marapus, where the water was deeper and thick with reeds. A team of local hunters, along with 2 police officers, was dispatched in wooden boats to sweep the low shoreline, the area where currents typically washed up debris and floating objects. The sky was hazy with mist, the sunlight dull as it reflected off the mud-scented surface of the lake. Duvall stood on the command boat, observing and noting the coordinates marked with bamboo stakes. Around mid-morning, one of the search boats radioed that they had spotted a strange object caught in the reeds at the western edge of the shore. Duvall immediately directed his boat to the location. When they arrived, they discovered a small dark object, half buried in the wet grass, covered with a thin layer of mud. A woman's medium-sized leather handbag, its brass clasp already rusted. Duvall ordered no one to touch it until the scene was photographed. Then it could be collected. An officer wearing rubber gloves carefully lifted the bag from the grass and placed it on a metal tray. The bag was closed, its surface caked with mud, undamaged with the strap intact. Duvall closely examined the direction of the current and noted that the mud was heavier on the front side, indicating the object had drifted from the shore rather than from the middle of the lake, he wrote, likely thrown from the western shore. Less than 24 hours ago, the bag was opened for a preliminary inspection on site under a tarp. Inside were a small wallet, a few paper bills, business cards printed with the name Barton Hamilton, accountant, address Gonzalez, along with a set of metal keys attached to a wooden tag engraved with the letter H. There was also a handkerchief embroidered with the initials CH and a lipstick tube with a broken cap. Everything was neatly placed in the tray and photographed item by item according to procedure. Duvall leaned in for a closer look. The bottom inside the bag was dry, only the edges damp, and the mud smell was fresh. He concluded the bag could not have been floating long and was likely thrown in recently. When he asked the search team, no one recalled seeing the object the previous day,
even though the western shore had already been given a preliminary sweep. That detail caught Duval's particular attention. He ordered a seizure report drawn up, assigned the temporary evidence code E4703, signed it on the spot, sealed the bag in a designated cloth evidence bag, and affixed an Ascension Parish Sheriff seal. An officer filmed the entire process. Duval stood at the edge of the reeds, watching the slow-moving murky water, sensing something was off. The location where the bag was found did not match the wind direction or current from the previous night, meaning the object had not drifted from far away, but was most likely placed there intentionally. He had the shoreline checked and found faint adult footprints leading down from the dirt
road, but the mud had dried and was not clear enough to identify the shoe type. Duval ordered the area cordoned off within a 50-meter radius to search for additional related items, but they found only a few rotten leaves and drifting trash. Once finished, he had the evidence transported back to headquarters and handed over to the technical division. That afternoon, in the parish's temporary laboratory, the handbag was reopened under bright white light. The preliminary report confirmed no traces of blood or biological tissue. The mud in the exterior matched soil samples taken from the western shore. No standing water inside the bag, indicating the object had not been fully submerged, but was thrown or placed near the water's edge. The business cards and keys matched information in the Hamilton file. Duval recorded the findings in the day's consolidated report. Personal handbag belonging to Christine Hamilton, discovered on the western shore of Lake Marapas. No damage, no signs of theft, likely discarded from the shore. No cabin or vehicle located within the search area. After signing the report, he circled in read the final note. First authenticated evidence, possible criminal connection. In a brief meeting with the search team leaders, Duval announced a temporary halt to water surface dragging to focus on the western shoreline, and shifted the case status from missing persons cause unknown to missing persons suspected criminal activity. He looked down at the worn map where a red circle marked the handbag's discovery point, isolated amid the vast expanse of reds. For the first time since taking the case, Duval felt the line between a simple disappearance and a criminal investigation beginning to blur. In the report sent to the parish office, he ended with, based on evidence item E4703, the Hamilton case is reclassified for special investigation. Search of the Lake Marapas area will continue with expanded scope. The following day, as soon as the first piece of evidence reached headquarters, Sheriff Walter Duval spent the entire evening reviewing the full file and the statements Charles Hamilton had provided. He spread out the map of the Lake Marapas area, marked the handbag's location, and compared it to the routes out of Gonzales that Charles had described in the initial interview. The statement claimed Barton and his wife left home in a friend's car, heading north along the Levi Road, then taking a small highway toward the lake region. However, highway patrol reports confirmed no witnesses had seen an unfamiliar vehicle in that area that night. Gas stations and roadside stores were questioned. No one had seen a couple matching their description. Duval also sent inquiries to neighboring parishes, Livingston and Tangipahoa, asking for information about any couple traveling with a younger person in recent days, but all responses were negative. He reread the on-scene report inside the Hamilton house. No suitcases, no luggage, no signs of preparation for a trip. Based on that, Duval concluded the vacation cabin story was becoming increasingly implausible. Meanwhile, Christine's handbag had been found at Lake Maras, with no signs of robbery or theft, making voluntary departure highly unlikely. He summoned Charles to the station for another session, this time formally, as the primary informant in the missing persons case. The interview took place in a small office, with only Duval and a note-taking assistant present. Duval re-asked about the departure time, who they left with, the vehicle, and why the parents chose to leave on a holiday. Charles repeated most of what he had already said. They went with his father's friends, an acquaintance couple from Baton Rouge, early the previous morning. He stayed behind to watch the house. Duval pressed for more details about the cabin, on which shore it was, any name or distinguishing features, but Charles said he had never been there and only heard his parents mention it. When informed that no cabin was registered under the Hamilton name or any known associates, Charles paused, then said his father might have rented it through someone else. Duval looked him straight in the eye and asked about the last time he saw his parents. When exactly did they leave the house? Charles said when he woke up, they were already gone and had only left a note on the kitchen table. But when Duval asked where the note was, he replied, "I probably threw it away after reading it." That answer was recorded verbatim in the transcript and underlined in red ink. After the interview ended, Duval sat rereading every line. Every detail Charles provided was unverifiable. No witnesses confirmed seeing them on the road, no cabin existed, and no vehicle was observed leaving the Hamilton house in that time frame. Neighbor reports stated the house lights remained on until late, then went dark, but no one heard an engine start. A woman living across the street clearly recalled stepping onto her porch around midnight because her dog was barking. She saw the front door closed and no headlights shining from the garage. All those statements, when cross-referenced with the still-parked Ford and the handbag found near the lake, convinced Duval that Barton and Christine Hamilton never left Gonzales in the manner their son described. He compiled all the data into a summary table with 3 columns: statement verification results, discrepancies. The first column listed Charles's account of the trip and the mysterious friends. The second recorded responses from lodges, local authorities, and witnesses around the lake. The third simply read, "No match, does not exist, no witnesses." When the table was complete, the final note contained only one line: "No evidence of departure from the area." Duval understood this could no longer be treated as an ordinary missing persons case. He closed the file, pulled a formal form from the drawer, and filled in the new case title: Hamilton Missing Persons, Suspicious Case. With black ink, he underlined the word suspicious to emphasize the special status. In his duty log for that day, he added a few lines. Victim's son's statements lack supporting evidence. No couple confirmed encountering the Hamiltons in the Lake Marup area. Neighbors confirmed no vehicle left the house. Based on evidence and scene cross-checks, case reclassified as suspected criminal. Duval carefully set the file aside, looked up at the wall map where Lake Marapus was circled in red. Every road from Gonzales to the lake had been checked, and there was no trace, except for that one small handbag. In his mind, a hypothesis was forming, not yet solid enough to voice, but strong enough to convince him that something terribly wrong had happened inside that white-painted house, on the hot night the whole town still believed had been peaceful. After completing the case reclassification paperwork and submitting the report to the parish office, Sheriff Walter Duval decided to take the next step: obtain an official search warrant for the Hamilton family home. The collected facts showed clear contradictions between statements and evidence, and verifying the scene had become necessary to either rule out or confirm criminal suspicions. The warrant was approved by the district court the following morning, authorizing a full search of the residence and surrounding property. Duval arrived with 2 officers and a forensic technician just after sunrise. The neighborhood was still quiet. The White House looked exactly as it had on their first visit. He ordered temporary barricades set up, restricted access, and invited a neighboring resident to witness the unlocking. After confirming all windows were locked from the inside, Duval had the front door opened with Charles Hamilton's key. The moment they stepped inside, the air felt heavy with dampness and smoke. Dim light filtered through thick curtains. He instructed no one to touch anything until the entire interior was photographed. The assistant set up the Rolleiflex camera and began documenting every corner. In the living room, they found the small coffee table tipped over, one leg broken, a fresh crack visible. Beneath it, the rug bore a palm-sized brownish stain, evenly spread and darker than the fabric. Duval crouched to examine it, shone a flashlight close, and noted, unidentified stain, possibly dried liquid. He had the technician cut out the stained section of rug and seal it in an evidence bag. On the dining table, the 2 coffee cups remained exactly as he had first seen them, now covered with a thin layer of dust, confirming no one had touched them in days. In the corner, the brick fireplace still held light-colored ash. The surface was fine and had not yet turned completely grey. Duval asked the technician, who confirmed the ash looked recent and unusual, mixed with tiny metal fragments and bits of ceramic. He used tweezers to collect several pieces into a vial labeled A471.
An additional ash sample was taken for
comparison. Shining the light deeper into the hearth, Duval detected a strange burnt smell, not entirely that of burning wood. He recorded the detail in his notebook. Continuing through the dining room and hallway, they found no missing items or signs of forced entry. In the master bedroom, the bed was neatly made, but small porcelain shards lay on the floor, possibly from a broken cup. He collected them, labeled B472. Charles's room was tidy. Nothing unusual except a cardboard box containing technical books and a few drawings. The entire downstairs was photographed from 4 angles. Every piece of potential evidence was marked with a ruler and identifier on the floor. When the team moved to the back porch, Duval noticed a small scratch on the doorframe, knee-high, with slight paint flaking, but not enough to determine the cause. He scraped off a bit of paint and wood with a thin blade and sealed it separately. The entire morning passed in near silence, broken only by camera shutters and the rustle of the technician's notes. By midday, the interior search was complete and the samples were sealed in 4 separate bags. The stained rug, ash and metal fragments from the fireplace, porcelain shards from the bedroom, and the doorframe wood sample. All were signed by Duval and countersigned by the witness. He stood in the living room one last time, surveying the house. Everything appeared carefully arranged. No chaos, no obvious signs of violence. Yet the perfect stillness gave him the feeling that real evidence had been hidden beneath this tidy surface. Before leaving, Duval had the technician reseal the doors and affixed police tape. A temporary scene report was written on site, describing overturned coffee table, brownish stain on rug suspected to be liquid, fresh ash in fireplace containing metal fragments. No signs of break-in, furnishings intact. As he left the house carrying the evidence bags, they felt heavier than their actual weight. He knew the small fragments collected that morning might be the first, albeit faint, clues to what had happened inside that quiet home on the night 2 people suddenly vanished. The samples collected during the Hamilton house search were carefully sealed by Sheriff Walter Duval and sent the next morning to the State Forensic Laboratory in Baton Rouge. The unit, equipped to handle complex or unclear cases with the most advanced analytical equipment available at the time. The receiving officer opened and invented each bag. The stained rug, ash mixed with metal fragments, porcelain shards, and doorframe sample. Each item was rephotographed and assigned its own code. Duval personally signed the transfer, emphasizing the brownish stain on the rug and the fireplace ash as the 2 most significant points. He left the lab with instructions to contact him the moment preliminary results were ready. During the waiting days, he continued reviewing statements and search maps, but no new leads emerged. By the end of the day week, the lab telegraphed that analysis was complete and requested his presence for the detailed briefing. When Duval returned to Baton Rouge, the chief technician, a man about his age, led him to a small conference room where the process samples and typed report lay on the table. According to the report, the brownish stain on the rug did not react to reagents for human or animal blood, yielding only a neutral result. Possibly some other dried organic substance such as coffee, wine, or mineral-rich water. There was no confirmation of blood. The fireplace ash showed unusual composition, higher than normal calcium levels, traces of lime compounds, a small amount of iron oxide, and metal impurities. The technician explained, "This could occur if wall plaster or ceramic items had been burned in the fireplace, but the exact source could not be determined. The recovered metal fragments were brass alloy, too small to identify the original object. The bedroom porcelain shards were simply from a broken cup, unrelated to any organic material. The doorframe wood showed no traces of violence or foreign paint, only natural scratching. The report concluded there was no definitive evidence of criminal activity or signs of a crime inside the Hamilton residence. The findings were stamped and signed by the 3 responsible technicians." Duval read every line repeatedly, then asked to re-examine the ash under a microscope. He noticed tiny white particles mixed with the black ash, but the technician confirmed they were plaster fragments that could have fallen during normal fireplace use. Duval made a private note. Ash with high calcium, abnormal source undetermined. Despite his lingering suspicion, he had to accept that the analysis provided no basis to open a criminal investigation. No blood, no signs of violence, no direct evidence.
Under state regulations, the case could only be upgraded with concrete proof of injury or death. Duval signed for the return of all evidence, repackaged it in sealed containers, and transported it back to the Ascension Parish Evidence Vault. On the drive back to Gonzales, he sat in silence, afternoon light filtering through the windshield onto the thick file resting on his lap. He understood the investigation had to pause at the verification stage, and any further effort would require new information. At headquarters, he opened the evidence cabinet, placed the box in the lock section, and labeled it Hamilton Lab Results, inconclusive. In that day's duty log, he wrote, Baton Rouge forensic report shows no blood traces. Ash contains calcium and lime. No criminal evidence. File paused at monitoring level. Insufficient legal basis for criminal investigation. Then he closed the log, leaned back in his chair, and felt the familiar weight of a case with no clear direction, where the collected fragments still refused to form a complete picture. In the quiet room, lit only by the ticking clock and the fading late-day sun on the wooden desk,
Duval knew that for now, the Hamilton case would remain classified as an undetermined disappearance, and all his questions would have to wait for answers that might never come. The report from Baton Rouge yielded no results that could advance the case, but Sheriff Walter Duval still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off in Charles Hamilton's statement. 2 days after receiving the lab findings, he sent a summons for Charles to come back to the station for a second interview, aiming to test the consistency between his story and the circumstantial evidence already collected. The interrogation took place in the small room at headquarters, with only Duval, a note-taking deputy, and Charles present. The atmosphere was quiet, broken only by the steady tick-tock of the wall clock. Duval began with the familiar questions: what time his parents left the house, who drove them, what they took with them. Charles repeated that his parents had left early in the morning, picked up by a friend of his father's to go to a cabin on Lake Morpus, taking 2 small suitcases and a grocery bag. Duval jotted notes and pressed for details about the suitcases: color, size, who carried them. Charles hesitated, then said, "One was brown, the other maybe blue." Duval compared this to the search inventory, which clearly stated no suitcases were missing, the closets were intact, clothes neatly folded. He pointed this out and asked if perhaps his parents had left the suitcases in their friend's car. Charles just nodded and added nothing more. Duval moved on to Christine's purse, found at Lake Mora. When he mentioned the business cards and keyring inside, Charles looked surprised and said, "Maybe Mom took a different purse, not that one." Duval paused, made a quick note, then asked how many similar purses his mother owned. The answer was vague. "I don't remember. Probably 2 or 3. She changed them a lot." Duval kept probing about the last time Charles saw his parents. He said they were already gone when he woke up, leaving only a short note on the kitchen table. Duval asked if he still had the note. Charles said he threw it away after reading it because it just said they were going away for a few days. Duval wrote down the exact wording and underlined it in red ink, just as he had before. He asked another question in the house: who usually locked the door when leaving? Charles answered, "Usually my dad." But when Duval asked why the door had been locked from the inside when he arrived, Charles didn't answer right away, and finally said, "Maybe his parents locked it by mistake and left through the back," even though Charles himself had already confirmed the back door was locked too. Duval wrote down the detail, slowly read it back to Charles, and asked him to confirm. Charles stared at the table and nodded reluctantly. Throughout the interview, Charles's voice stayed steady, not trembling, but it lacked naturalness. His answers were evasive and occasionally contradicted themselves. When Duval pressed for more about the friend who had driven his parents, Charles repeated, "They were friends from Baton Rouge. I don't really remember. My parents said they knew them from work." Duval asked for a description of the person or the car. Charles said, "I think it was a grey car, a sedan." Then, a few minutes later, corrected himself. "Maybe blue." Duval looked up and stared at him without speaking, then signaled the deputy to write it down. He understood that these inconsistent details were by themselves already undermining the entire story. After more than an hour, Duval moved to the summary, reading back each point and asking Charles to sign the statement. Charles signed without further comment. Duval watched his expression as he left the room, eyes down, gait calm but slightly tense. When the door closed, Duval sat still, staring at the thick notes. Everything was at the level of suspicion, nothing direct. Christine's purse, the ashes in the fireplace, the brown stain on the rug, all vague, nothing conclusive. He knew he couldn't hold Charles just on a bad feeling. There was no legal basis to link him to anything. Before closing the report, Duval added a short line in his duty log. Second statement, inconsistent, lacking specifics but no direct evidence. Subject released, continue monitoring. He closed the notebook, looked out the small window behind his desk, where the late afternoon light cast a dim stripe. The Hamilton case, though it had moved a few steps forward, still felt like a road disappearing into fog. Every trace dissolved the moment it seemed within reach. In the weeks following the second interview, Sheriff Walter Duval continued directing searches around Gonzales, but nothing changed. No new witnesses, no tire tracks, no bodies or additional belongings turned up. The evidence file sent from Baton Rouge was reviewed multiple times. Every analysis reached the same conclusion. No definitive criminal element. Highway patrol units stopped sweeping the roads, and the Lake Marasa search team disbanded after finding nothing beyond a few pieces of driftwood and trash. Local papers had run short articles about the mysterious disappearance of a Gonzales couple, but no one had more information. Duval, still suspicious, understood the case had reached the limit of what the law allowed him to pursue. One long afternoon, he sat in his office reviewing the entire file. Scene reports, photographs, search maps, Charles's statements, lab reports, everything stacked into a thick folder that was nevertheless empty of real answers. No evidence of a crime, no grounds for an arrest warrant or further investigation. Under pressure from superiors, he was forced to draft the report, closing the initial investigation phase. In the summary sent to the Ascension Parish office, the typed conclusion read, "No bodies recovered, no new physical evidence, no proof of criminal activity. Conclusion, disappearance undetermined." The file was assigned case number 47117 and moved to temporary storage in Baton Rouge. Duval signed last, stamped it with the red Paris sheriff seal, feeling both unfinished and powerless. The Hamilton case, once the focus of attention in the early days, was quickly replaced by routine matters, thefts, fires, land disputes. The Hamiltons' neighbors stopped talking about it. The white-painted house gradually became abandoned, grass overgrowing the walkway. Charles Hamilton stayed there a few more weeks, then sold the house to a distant relative and left Louisiana. Immigration records showed he moved to Texas without leaving a forwarding address. Duval made a short note in his pocket notebook. Victim's son left the state. Case, no progress. That fall, he sent a letter to state police requesting the Hamilton file remain on a watch list in case new information surfaced. A reply came weeks later. Will be retained and reopened upon new data. From then on, file 4707 sat untouched in storage in Baton Rouge, its cover bearing only 3 lines. Hamilton, Barton, and Christine, missing persons, 1947. No one mentioned it again. No supplemental reports, no updates. Duval still thought about the case on late-night shifts, staring at the reflection of streetlights on rows of old files in the cabinet. He always felt he had missed something in that White House. One small detail that could have changed everything. But time and procedure had stripped him of the authority to dig deeper. When 1947 ended, the final report on the Hamiltons was filed under unresolved missing persons, alongside dozens of others who had left town and never returned. The folder grew thinner over time, paper yellowing, ink fading, and the name Hamilton gradually slipped from the memory of anyone who had once known them, leaving only a few dry lines in the register. No bodies recovered, no additional evidence. Case closed. The Hamilton file lay undisturbed in the Baton Rouge archives for many years after the initial investigation was closed. Occasionally, during routine audits, a clerk would open the metal cabinet, check the index, add a new sticker, and slide it back into place. No one requested updates. No new information arrived. The 1950s and 1960s passed. Gonzales changed with paved roads, and the old lumber mill where Barton had worked changed owners. The Hamilton disappearance survived only as a vague old story among the elderly.
Sheriff Walter Duvall served nearly 2 more decades, retiring in 1968. He always called it the only unfinished case of my career. He died in 1972, taking his private notes with him, unread. The Hamiltons' White House passed through multiple owners, was renovated and reconfigured, but no one knew that behind its walls and under its floors had once been the scene of an unsolved disappearance. As for Charles Hamilton, tax records showed he settled in Texas, later moved to Oklahoma, worked odd jobs in mechanics, never married, had no criminal
record, and died of lung disease in 1982, buried on the outskirts of Tulsa. With the death of the last family member, the case effectively vanished from community memory. Related documents faded, printed ink turned silver, scene photos lost color, some pages stained brown by humidity. When archivists conducted inventory in the early 1990s, they noted original evidence deteriorating. Digitize when feasible. That work, however, waited many more years. In 2005, the state of Louisiana officially established the Cold Case Unit under the Criminal Investigation Bureau, tasked with reviewing all unsolved disappearances and homicides from the previous century. The project was federally funded to pilot DNA technology and digitize records. At the new headquarters in Baton Rouge, thousands of old case files were transferred from parish offices and lined the shelves. During sorting, Inspector Megan Crowell, 39, was assigned the pre-1950 missing persons group. She was experienced in reconstructing cases from faint evidence and incomplete files, having worked on several data recovery projects. Among the yellowed folders, she noticed a thin one typed on the cover. Hamilton Barton and Christine, Missing Persons, 1947. The jacket bore a faded red stamp. Disappearance undetermined. In the lower right corner was the barely visible seal of the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Office. Inside, besides the summary report, there were only a few blurry photos and carbon copies of the 1947 Baton Rouge lab results. The black and white pictures of the White House, the overturned coffee table, the fireplace, and the rug with dark streaks made Megan linger longer than usual. She read every line of the old reports, noting the description's unidentified brown stain and ash containing calcium and lime. At the end was Walter Duvall's signature and a private note in blue ink. Something's not right, but can't prove it. The file was categorized as suspicious, insufficient criminal data. Under cold case guidelines, files showing irregularities or retaining testable evidence were prioritized for re-evaluation. Megan Krell, a cold case inspector, begins revisiting the 1947 Hamilton disappearance, a case once closed with inconclusive results. As she examines the physical evidence, Megan notices inconsistencies between the scene report and the photographs, particularly discrepancies in the position of a coffee table and the stain. Most troubling is a note from Sheriff Duvall stating, "Item destroyed without documentation." Megan's suspicions grow when she discovers unusual ash composition at the crime scene and hears a witness statement about a white ash layer under the fireplace tiles from a homeowner. Megan pushes for the case to be reopened, and an excavation of the Hamilton house reveals human bone fragments, likely from Christine Hamilton, who had been missing since 1947. DNA analysis later confirms the bones belong to Christine Hamilton, leading Megan to reclassify the case as a homicide. The investigation unfolds. Further evidence surfaces, including a fired shotgun shell from a Remington firearm registered to Barton Hamilton, and dismemberment tools found behind the house. Megan ties the pieces together. Barton Hamilton was likely shot, Christine burned in the fireplace, and their son Charles may have been involved in the crime. Megan uncovers a significant lead when she locates Sarah LeBlanc, the Hamilton family maid, who remembers hearing a gunshot and witnessing Charles dragging a heavy object away from the house the next morning. Despite reporting this to Sheriff Duvall, her statement was never recorded in 1947. The investigation continues with a focus on Raymond Duvall, the sheriff's son, who had access to the case files in the 1970s. Megan discovers that Raymond may have tampered with the evidence to protect Charles, and a search of his home uncovers a wooden box containing incriminating documents. Raymond eventually confesses to covering up the crime to protect his brother Charles. The case is finally reclassified as a double homicide, and Raymond Duvall is arrested for obstruction of justice. In March 2006, Raymond is convicted, and the case is officially closed after 58 years. Megan reflects on the importance of justice, DNA technology,
and the role of modern forensic science in solving cold cases. The Hamilton case serves as a reminder that no secret can remain hidden forever, and justice will always find a way.